Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Maz and today I'm in Gloucester. And in today's video I'll be trying out this Mercedes CLK. A huge thank you to Iqbal for lending me his car, and if you are a Mercedes-Benz owner of this era, AMG or otherwise, and you would like your car featured on the channel, feel free to reach out. A quick overview: the Mercedes CLK was Mercedes-Benz's coupe and convertible from 1997 to 2009. The first, which is the C208, and then the second, the C209, which this one is. The CLK replaced the C124 and A124 E-Class coupe and convertible. Just as the CLK was put into production, this was roughly the unfortunate period where Mercedes or Daimler merged with Chrysler to form Daimler Chrysler, which lasted from 1998 to 2007. So this car was introduced during that period. Now, it was supposed to be a merger of equals, but in reality it was more of an acquisition. And unfortunately, this was the period where Mercedes cars just did not have the build quality like their predecessors did. Now, unlike its predecessor, even though the CLK looks like its E-Class counterpart, so W210 and in this case the W211, the underpinnings are actually from the lesser C-Class. As a result, it's more of Mercedes' answer to the 3 Series Coupe, albeit at a higher price point. Now, if you want to see me review an E46 330ci, click on the top right hand corner of the screen or in the link in the description down below. Now, the first generation CLK, the C208, ran from 1997 to 2003. The coupe was discontinued in May of 2002 and the convertible stayed in production for another year. And there was a variant, if you can call it a variant, called the CLK GTR. But we're going to gloss over that, and in this video we're only going to talk about the second generation, the C209 or the A209, which ran from 2002 to 2009, being replaced by the E-Coupe and Cabriolet C207. Unlike the 124, the 207 was still based on the C-Class, despite its E-Class name. But then after the C207 came the C238, which was based on the E-Class saloon. And whilst this car was in production, there was a smaller Mercedes coupe called the C-Class Sport Coupe, which was later named the CLC and was then replaced by the C-Class Coupe. So for a brief moment, you could go to your local Mercedes dealer and see 2 different coupes based on the same platform. And of course, the C-Coupe stayed in production for 1 more year, as with the aforementioned E-Coupe, only to then be replaced by one car yet again, the CLE, which, just like the CLK, sits between the C-Class and the E-Class. Now, this particular car is a CLK200 Kompressor, which uses a supercharged 1.8 4-cylinder petrol. And the range includes this, the CLK200, the CLK220 CDI, the CLK240, the CLK270 CDI, the CLK320 petrol and diesel, and then the CLK500, with the range topping CLK55 AMG. Now, not all of these variants were available throughout the CLK's lifespan. 240 was replaced by the 280, and the petrol 320 was replaced by the petrol 350. Whilst it was still called a 500 here, in North America it was replaced by the 550, and then the CLK55 was replaced by the CLK63, and the CLK DTM was only in production for a couple of years at the start, and then at the tail end of its production run came the CLK Black Series. Originally, this car only had 2 trim levels, the entry-level Elegance and the range-topping Avant-Garde. The entry-level Elegance had a silver grille and green tints. The Avant-Garde had a black grille and blue tints. However, this later car is an AMG Sport, which has the appearance of a CLK55. And the windows are down right now, otherwise this car has black tints. And the reason they're down is because the CLK just like many other Mercedes coupes before it, has no B-pillar, which means, unlike the E46, you can drop the front window and the rear window. So you get this giant opening, making the interior feel more airy. And as I've mentioned, this car is available as a coupe or a convertible. Now, the first and second generations of CLK, their soft-top variants were done by Carman, who then went bankrupt a year after the CLK was discontinued. And the name CLK stood for Coupe Luxus Kurz, which is German for Coupe Luxury Short, because this is fundamentally the smaller version of the larger CL without the K. But that car deserves its own review, and the same could be said about the SLK, Sportlich Leicht Kurz, which is the smaller equivalent to the larger SL. Whilst most CLKs were automatics, starting with 5-speed and then later the 7-speed, an entry-level 6-speed manual was available. But considering Mercedes cars from this period gave you foot-operated parking brakes, that meant the manual CLK had 4 pedals. And here are the specs for this particular car. So here is the front of the CLK C209, and here is the key fob. Personally, I think this is the best key fob that Mercedes have ever made. It's very distinct. They've had this key fob from 2002 all the way up until about 2016, and I think it stood the test of time very well. It's got chrome down the side and on the bottom. It's got a massive star on the center, and the bottleneck design means even from afar, like this, you can still tell it's a Mercedes key. As I was saying, this has the black grille as seen on the Avant-Garde, and this is referred to as the Sport grille. So the Sport grille has this massive badge on the grille and a tiny flat one on top, unlike its predecessor, which has the Classic grille. So a vertical slat here and a bonnet ornament sticking out. This particular car has the halogen lights, but you can also opt for xenons if you prefer. As I've mentioned, this is an AMG Sport. It has the same front bumper as the CLK55, and this was also from a time when fog lights were a desirable option. And these headlights are from that 2000s era when Mercedes had double bubble headlights, just like the W211 E-Class, the W203 C-Class, and the R230 SL. And what's interesting is that this front end was not just used on the CLK. Mercedes also made the C55, which has the front end of a CLK 55 in order to accommodate the V8 engine. All CLKs come with this long singular bonnet vent, whereas an SL will have 2 smaller ones, one on each side. Coming around, this car has the 5-spoke wheels, and they even say AMG on the spokes as well. These are 18 inches, with the Elegance trim having 17 inches and 7-spoke wheels, and the Avant-Garde also having 18-inch wheels, but with a different wheel design. The trims would have otherwise been labelled here, but on the Sport, they are disregarded. This was one of the first Mercedes-Benz models to have the side repeater on the mirror, as opposed to the front 3/4. Here's the side profile. And that lack of B-pillar, I think, completely transforms the way this car looks. And it just looks a lot more svelte and a lot more elegant than the equivalent E46. Here's what it looks like with the windows up. This car even has a shark fin, and the back wheels are slightly deep dished. So you get 2 2.5s at the front and 2 5.5s at the back. Coming to the back, once again, it looks very similar to the W211 E-Class on which it's based. This particular car is a facelift, so it has the larger white sections on the centre of the tail lights, whereas its predecessor will have more of a curved design. And once again, this links to the W211 on which it looks like, even though it's based on the W203. And being a Sport, you get this lip spoiler here, again also found on the CLK55. Compressor means supercharger, and once again it has a sportier rear bumper with a large oval tailpipe. Now in the case of the CLK55, originally that car only had 2 oval tips on the left, then a couple of years later it had 4 oval tips on the back, but that was still a pre-facelift. And then after that came the facelift CLK63, which had 4 exhaust tips. But regardless of which AMG variant you get, the convertible always has 2 tips on the left. Coming to the back, you do get a very cavernous boot for a coupe, especially one that's based on the C-Class. Here's how much space you get. And because Mercedes is a German car manufacturer, you get a warning triangle and a first aid kit, which is mandatory in Germany. And if I lift this up, you also got some added storage cubbies underneath. And if you want, you can also fold the seats down. Now what's interesting is that there's a handle here to close, but you also get another handle here also to close. Those tail light tints are aftermarket. Now coming inside, normally I've not been a fan of Mercedes interiors of this era, but the CLK I think stood the test of time very well. There are a few blemishes around, but overall I think it still looks very modern. Here's what the door card looks like. You get this nice padded section here, and of course it has an airbag. Being an AMG Sport, you got the silver trim here, and you get a nice chrome door handle on the corner. If I had to be picky, is that these door cards are very small and you can't really fit a bottle in there. And because the rear windows fold down, you get 4 window switches despite being a coupe. And that's the electronic releaser for the boot. You get metal kick plates with Mercedes-Benz written on them. This isn't really a top spec car, so you got some manual adjustments for the seats, AMG floor mats, and just like the S55, that part of the carpet always flops down. And just like that S55 that I filmed, that part of the carpet always flops down. And again, being the Sport, you got alloy pedals. And that tiny pedal there is a foot operated parking brake, which you release by pulling on this, but then you apply by putting your foot on that. This is where the key goes, and here are your window switches and your lights. Here's what the seats look like, bespoke to the CLK. And over there you've got some bolster adjustments. But fundamentally this is a 4-door car, so that means one thing. Let's see if I can get into the back. Okay, so getting into the back right now, so I pull on a lever here, which automatically moves the seat forward on its rails, and the backrest folds forward. Stepping inside, pull the seat back, and now I'm in. Sat in the back now. I've kept the windows down because the aftermarket tints are far too dark, but that being said, with this dark headlining it still feels somewhat gloomy. I've got some very generous legroom in the back. That seat is somewhat in my driving position, and for a coupe there are lots of amenities here. So between the 2 seats is this storage cubby. If I fold that down, there we go. And if I press on the front, 2 cup holders. You get storage pockets on the front seats and 2 climate control vents, and underneath an ashtray. Classic Mercedes, the very cheap plastics used for the housing, which they still use to this day. And to exit, simply pull on the tab again, push. Luckily the windows are down, I can just pull on the exterior door handle, and out I go. Now coming inside, you probably can't see it from here, but the seatbelt butler has operated. I'll get back to that later, but first let me pull up these windows. and now they've retracted. Once again, the interior is just as stylish as the exterior. Like I said, it's not their finest achievement, but I do think it complements the way the car looks very well. And as I've mentioned, and talking about the seatbelt butler, because in coupes the seatbelt mount is so far away, if I were to supposedly re-enter the car, or not, try again. There we go. This mechanism basically brings the seatbelt forward, so I don't have to reach all the way over there. And this is seen on other Mercedes coupes as well, pillarless or otherwise. And if I turn off the engine, it returns to its designated spot. Otherwise, here's my point of view. It has the same corporate Mercedes steering wheel from this era, seen on the E-Class, the CLS and the SL. But being an AMG Sport, it is a lot more sportier looking with these perforations on 9 and 3 and paddles. And what's unusual about these paddles is that the up paddle has an extrusion and the down paddle has an intrusion. This was also from a time when Mercedes had these sticky buttons, so every time you'd clean them, some of the paint will be pulled off. And it's the same story here as well. And it's not just the buttons, even these sections here get sticky as well. This particular car has heated front seats, and just to let you know that you haven't picked the option, you do get blank switches here, unfortunately. This is a facelifted car, so you got the facelifted system, and if I were to press this button, a CD pops out. I'll get back to the screen later. Here's the HVAC system, back when HVAC systems were properly separate to the infotainment system. And it is a dual zone, but normally it's the outer dials that are the temperature, and then maybe an inner one for the fan. But in the case of the CLK, it's the other way round. So it's the small inner dials that are the temperature, the left dial is your fan speed, and then your right dial is your direction. Here's what the bolster adjusters look like. You simply pull on these tabs forward and back, or in the case of this one, left to right. As I've mentioned, this is an automatic, and this is a 5-speeder in particular, and Mercedes have clearly forgotten that this car is right-hand drive. So all right-hand drive Mercedes automatics from this era have their PRND label on the passenger side. And you can choose 3 different driving modes: comfort, sport, or manual. And it would also showcase on the instrument cluster as well. And because this is from a certain era, that's an ashtray with a cigarette lighter, though the owner of this car has added in one of these chargers. You've got a storage cubby here, probably useful for coins, but I think they should have turned that into a cup holder. You get a large opening here for the glove box. It was jammed, so here's a picture of one open. Here's what the passenger door card looks like. And I've mentioned these tints are very dark. And here's what the seat looks like again. The seat material does not feel like leather at all. Older models had MB Tex, newer cars have Artico, though I don't know what they call it here in the CLK. It is MB Tex, though in this later car it was branded as Artico. Besides that, you do get genuine leather on the steering wheel. You also get a lockable center storage cubby, which is very small. And because this is a Mercedes, you get your indicators and your wipers on the same stalk. And this stalk is for your cruise control. And when I was driving the S55, every time I went for the indicator, I kept hitting this one, as the indicator stalk is all the way down here. Now what's unusual is, every time I operate the indicator, the cruise control stalk moves with it occasionally, like so. Here's what the 3 dials look like. Again, just like what you get in a W211 or the 219 CLS. So you got your tiny rev counter on the right, your large speedo on the middle with a floating needle and a screen inside it, and your clock to your right with these tiny digital readers for your temperature and your fuel. And because it's a sport, you get this brushed aluminium surround as well. And here's what they look like with the lights on. Interestingly, just like a VW Group car, if you turn on your lights and then pull the dial, you turn on your rear fog lights, and then pull it again once more, you turn on your front fog lights. Turning on the infotainment system now. Initially greeted with this Mercedes-Benz badge, and of course the warning message. So this is one of Mercedes' first command infotainment systems, and here's what the screen looks like. So this is your radio, that's your video, and these tiny buttons here are what you control the screen with. Otherwise, this is not a touch screen. There are some dead pixels here, mind you. Once again, sat nav, map, phone, and service. That's your volume dial, that's your other control for the infotainment system, and that's there for you to dial a number. Just like other Mercs, you get a driver's side grab handle as well. Whilst you do have this nice soft headlining here, unfortunately it's not added on to the sun visor, so it's very plasticky. And maybe there's some wiring issues, but the light is going on even though the mirror is technically shut. But otherwise, here's the vanity mirror and somewhere to store your notes. And like I said, due to this dark headlining, it is very gloomy in here, and this is your overhead console, so reading lights, front light, and your rear light. So that's the exterior and interior done now, so let's see what this car is like to drive. So I don't have to put the foot on the brake because this is an older car, so just twist the key. Now the seatbelt buckler has worked. Buckle up, into drive. Oh, and yes, the parking brake, and off we go. So from first impressions, the car feels a lot more isolated compared to the E46 that I've driven. However, that E46 is a 6-cylinder and this only has 4. So whilst I can't really compare how the two cars perform, what I can do is compare how the two cars feel inside. And I must say, here in the CLK, it does feel a little bit more special. Luckily, I remembered to pull the correct stalk this time. At a red light, now it's green, off we go. Weather's been brilliant all week, and today just happens to be the day it's all cloudy. But so far I do feel cocooned. It feels a lot more relaxing on stop-start than the E46. And this particular car is a 5-speed manual. And if I'm honest, I don't really want a CLK with a manual, especially when this car has a foot-operated parking brake. So trying to do a hill start in a manual car with a foot-operated parking brake is quite a handful. And here in Gloucester, I do see quite a lot of Mercs. There's a CLA45 over there, and in front of me is an R320, the big MPV that Mercedes made. Also, it could just be this particular car with the dark tints. It does feel very dark and dingy, but like I said, from factory, the Elegance trim would have green tints, and then the Avant-Garde will have blue. And I'm not sure what the AMGs have. But as far as driving dynamics go, there's nothing much to talk about so far. It is a 1.8 4-cylinder, but it is supercharged, and unfortunately I cannot hear any supercharger noise at all. I'll properly put my foot down later on once I'm in a 70 zone, and this car is very good to cruise in. And I think that's what Mercedes originally intended the CLK to be, especially when it costs significantly more than an E46 when new. And brakes are very smooth as well. And right now the gearbox is in comfort, but if I want, I can just press this for manual, and once again for sport. But once again, that's for later on. Okay, on the roundabout now. Steering, considering this is... Steering for a Mercedes is quite weighty. That could be because I'm in the sport trim, so I'm sure an Elegance or an Avant-Garde will have lighter steering, possibly. But compared to the other Mercs I've driven, including the AMGs, the steering feels sporty. And speed bump, and another speed bump, and once again that isolation is not compromised when driving through a heavily undulated road like Barton Street. And here comes another speed bump and an undulation. The sounds are just about coming through, but the isolation in this car is brilliant. And like I said, the direct competitor to this car, the E46, was already very good, but this just takes it up a notch. And here in Barton it's a 20-mile-an-hour zone, and this car just revs at 1200 RPM, so not a great deal more than tick over. So if you ever want to cruise around Gloucester at night, this car is quite suitable. And one thing I really like about the CLK is it does feel special in here to an extent. Yes, there's some creaky plastics here. Yes, some of the finishes have gone sticky and some of the chrome has gone away. But in terms of wow factor, this car definitely has it. Would this car be better off with Windsor leather and extended onto the dash? Definitely. But for its period, this is very nice. And like I said, this was from the Daimler Chrysler period. There goes another Mercedes. And of course, the best thing about the CLK, you can do that. So off we go. I've also noticed the armrest on the door and the center armrest are pretty much level, so I can rest both elbows like so. And like I said, it's rush hour here in Gloucester, but I don't feel stressed at all. I still feel very relaxed. And I've mentioned about these seats, they are bespoke to the CLK. And if I wanted to, I can tighten up the lumbar support, which make a hissing sound when you release them, like a bus on air suspension. But I can adjust lumbar support, and I can make the seat bolsters tighter or looser. Whilst I'm okay with having this auto selector down here, I know Mercedes also use the same cutout and bezel for the manual version. I still prefer to have the column mounted selector here. That way they could have used this section here for added practicality, because even though you got two cup holders in the back, there are none up front. So yeah, none in here and none on the door cards, and definitely none coming out of the dash. And this one here is only for coins. Also, the gear selector has genuine leather as well, so it does feel a bit weird having leatherette for the seats and then genuine leather for the gear selector and steering wheel. So overall, I would say the ride comfort in this car is brilliant. And now we're entering the city centre, rush hour city centre as well. Personally, I'm okay with the way this car steers. I don't mind the weight at all, but your average Mercedes driver may start to complain that the steering feels a bit too heavy for city maneuverability. Turning in. But that's only because I've driven But otherwise, in isolation, the steering is absolutely acceptable. I'm only commenting like that because I've driven various other Mercedes cars back to back, as well as cars from other manufacturers. Okay, turning once again. So yes, overall I would say city maneuverability is satisfactory. It's only when you compare it to other Mercedes cars that it may feel a bit too heavy for city maneuverability. But I personally like the weightier steering. But if you've driven various other Mercedes cars, that may be something to look out for. Let's see what it's like at a tight left-hander. Barely any body roll. But that could be because I have these seat bolsters to their tightest setting. So there's only one thing left to do, see what this car is like on the open road. If I had to be a bit picky, is that these door mirrors are very small, and as a result, rearward visibility is somewhat compromised, but not by much. But that could just be me being used to having larger mirrors, whether it's on my personal car or newer Mercs. Okay, so making our way to the national speed limit now. So for that, I need to put the gearbox into sport mode, like so. On the roundabout now. Again, these are not the sportiest seats. I am sort of slipping out of them. And they are bolstered up as well. On the national speed limit. 3, 2, 1, and kick down. I've mentioned earlier I could not hear the supercharger whine, but after about 4,500 RPM, I can just about hear the supercharger whine. Again, I'm only driving a 1.8 4-cylinder, so there's not really much to talk about in terms of the way this car dynamically performs. Again, I'm fine with the steering, and this is where the steering does show its benefits, but those were just some water bottles in the back. But you do really have to put your foot down to make some progress. So let me just quickly put this back into comfort. Get up to speed. There we go. And at 70, this car is revving at 2,600 RPM. So it is somewhat on the noisy side, but for a 5-speeder that is actually very good. So let's make a U-turn on that roundabout and see what it's like in manual mode. I think at 70 this car cruises at a slightly lower RPM than the 330 Ci, the 5-speed 330 Ci that I drove. Anyways, back into sport now. Into manual now. Pull the paddle. It takes a really long time for the paddles to react. But is it quicker this way? It's quicker through the gear selector, I think. So drop down. 3, 2, 1, and okay, once you put it into maximum attack, even though I'm only in a CLK200, this car really does feel very dynamic. But like I said, pull a paddle, it takes a really long time to... You have to pull and hold the paddle for it to react. So let's try again, so pull and hold. Yeah, changing gears is quicker with the gear selector. Do I wish this car was a manual? No, actually. I think Mercedes have made a brilliant cruiser with this car. It's relaxing when you need it to be, but when that opportunity comes, it can be fun to drive. And personally, I do like the weightier steering wheel. And personally, I do prefer the weightier steering. So let's head back to the car park and finalize this video. Actually, before we get there, let's cruise with the windows down. And one thing I like with this lack of B-pillar solution and the fact that the windows drop down is that I'm getting a bit of a convertible experience in a coupe. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching me try out this Mercedes CLK200. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you are new, ring the bell to stay up to speed, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers!